Welcome to the Iron John podcast. In this episode, Ben Dennis and me, Walton Stanley, carry the story of Unktehi's Seventh Spot, an American story of the Dakota people. The story contrasts with European tales, as it is a story of gaining great power and, in time, surrendering that power back to its source. This recording is from the 40th anniversary Minnesota Men's Conference that was held in October 2024. So now, here is Unktehi's Seventh Spot.
Human beings carry a lot of stuff around. I have a theory that that's why we're here, to mess things up, to move things from one place to another, to reshape matter in funny, clever ways. Maybe it entertains the Creator or someone to watch us doing that. One of the things we move around, in addition to plants and corn and sweet potatoes and arrows and rocks, one of the things we move around are stories. Earlier in this conference, we heard a story from far off, from over the sea, from out east. This story, however, comes right out of this land. It comes out of the people who were here, who are still here. The people who were driven off this land, but have managed to come back, have managed to cling on. This story isn't in their language now. It's probably been messed with, reshaped, twisted in some way. But this story is still emerging from this land. And maybe tomorrow, when we're dancing around on this land again, we can dance this story back into this land one more time and see what grows. So long ago, much closer to the time of the creation than we are now, in that time, there was a powerful medicine being, some say a witch, named Unktehi. And Unktehi took a certain dislike to the animals we call human beings. She developed an animosity toward our kind. And so, in order to be a more effective scourge to us, she took the form of a great water monster. It is said that Unktehi was as long in the form of a water monster as 100 horses lined up, nose to tail. And her body was as big around as the trunk of a great cottonwood tree. She was covered all over with scales of shining mica. And there were fins that were flame-colored that ran along the back of her spine. She had one great horn coming out of her head. And there were also a series of spots that ran down her side from her head to her tail. Unktehi would raid the villages of the human beings, or would snatch them from the water's edge when they came to get water or to harvest fish. It might have been in this river right here that Unktehi spent some time. Now, of course, many of the young men among the people wanted to kill Unktehi to stop her depredations upon the people. But this was not an easy thing to accomplish. The only way that Unktehi could be killed was to fire an arrow precisely into the seventh spot behind her head. For under that seventh spot is where her cold, red, crystal heart lay. Not only did they want to kill her because she was an enemy to the people, but it was also known that the one who could kill Unktehi and take her cold red crystal heart would gain tremendous power. He would be able to see the future, to know what was coming and anticipate it. And also, he would be irresistibly attractive. And so women would flock to him and throw themselves at him and crawl into his blanket. However, in addition to the difficulty inherent in killing Unktehi, in shooting her right in the 7th spot, there was a bigger problem, because anyone who glimpsed any part of Unktehi was instantly struck blind, which made shooting her even more difficult. And not only that, but a day after being struck blind, that person would go entirely insane. And on the 3rd day, that person would start to foam at the mouth. And on the 4th day, that person would die. And not only that, his whole family would die. His grandparents, his parents, his children, his wife, his aunts, his uncles, they would all die on the 4th day. And this dissuaded many young men from trying to kill Unktehi. Now, living among the people at that time were 2 brothers, twins. And these brothers had lost their family. They were orphan brothers. They had only themselves in the world. And because of this, these young men had very little in the way of material goods. They didn't have a family to build them a lodge or to make them fine weapons or even to make nice clothes for them. And so they had to survive on the hand-me-downs, the things other people had cast off or would give them out of charity. They had to live in lodges where they'd be welcome for a few days and then they'd have to move on somewhere else. As you might imagine, these men, these young men, these twin brothers, were not of high status in the society. In addition, the younger of the twin brothers, younger by less than an hour, but still younger, had lost his eyes in an accident when he was young. He was blind, and in place of his eyes were simply empty sockets. And the older brother took care of him, led him around where he needed to go, and did his best to provide for them both. That's how it was. Now, one day, the brothers were talking, and the blind brother, the younger brother, said, "We should kill Unktehi." And the older brother, though only elder by a matter of really minutes, still had learned the art of speaking as an elder brother to a younger brother. And he said, "You've got to be crazy." And the younger brother said, "No, listen, this is perfect. I'm blind. I can't see Unktehi, so she doesn't have power over me. I can be the one that can shoot Unktehi." And the elder brother said, "Allow me to point out one flaw in this otherwise nearly perfect plan. How do you propose that you, being blind, shoot Unktehi exactly in the 7th spot?" And the younger blind brother said, "Well, I've heard stories that far off in the west, in the Black Hills, in that sacred land, there is a medicine woman named Old Ugly Woman. An old ugly woman, they say, had as a medicine bow and arrows, and those arrows always hit their intended target. And I propose that you and I go out there and ask her if she might just give us that medicine bow and arrow. And so they decided to do that. And the elder brother led the blind brother out to the west. They walked for a long time. They walked from the place where there was woods to where the woods grew thin. It turned into savanna land. They crossed many streams, many creeks, and many rivers. They walked on to where the trees grew sparse and the grassland took over. They walked to where the land became flat. They walked on and on until the land began to ripple again. They walked through strange rock formations, and they came at last into the land of the great Black Hills. And one day in their wanderings in that place, they came to an area where there was a sheer cliff face, and in that cliff face there was the mouth of a cave, and around that cave were painted strange spirit beings. And they knew this was the home of Old Ugly Woman.
So as they approached this cave, looking at the markings on the wall, they stopped some distance. And there was movement inside the cave. And inside that cave, Old Ugly Woman crept out slowly and looked. And in a quiet voice, very different from the one that I'm giving you now, she said, what are you doing here? She knew, of course. And the older of the brothers said, we've come because we wish to do battle with Unktehi, the great water serpent that is killing our people. And we've heard that you have great medicine arrows that never, ever miss their mark. And she paused for a moment. And she said, come into my cave. And she sat them down next to the fire. And she fed them a little bit of spruce tea and some sweet pemmican and some berry soup, a little bit of meat. And then she lit some tobacco and they had a smoke. She didn't say anything about their request. And after they had eaten, and after they had rested, she looked at them, these two fine-looking young men, one blind, one sighted. And she said, what shall you give me if I give you my arrows? And the boys whispered to each other. And finally the elder said, we're poor men. We're poor young men, and we don't have any material goods to offer in trade, but we know that you are a powerful, powerful woman, and that you have the ability to give us these arrows so that we can save our people. And the old woman had a little gleam in her eye. And she said, well, you're fine-looking young men. And it has been a very, very long time since I've felt the warmth of a young body next to me, under my blanket. And the elder brother's eyes grew wide, as he took in this vision. A head like a stone with a little bit of dry grass. Wrinkly skin that looked nothing much different than old snow pockmarked by the sun. And when she smiled, if there was 3 teeth showing, I'd be exaggerating. Her breasts. Well, have you ever seen milk thistle pods that are all dried in the sun? Mm-hmm. And she had, well, they used to be hips. Now they looked nothing so different than old gnarled branches on the riverside, dried in the sun. And the elder brother took all of this in, and he leaned over to his younger brother and said, "Younger brother, I see what she looks like. I don't think I could perform up to the standards that she's asking." And the younger brother said, "Well, I'm blind. I can't see her. So I will sacrifice myself and take one for this particular endeavor." And with that, the elder brother hung his head and crept out of that cave and sat outside in a hump. And the younger brother sidled over next to old ugly woman. And she smiled. Thank God he couldn't see that smile. And she pulled a blanket around him, and he put his arm around her. And when he did, he felt smooth skin. He felt plump roundness. He could feel the cascade of long, luxurious, smooth, silky hair. Well, not to get too many details going here, things went as your imagination is now thinking they went. And after a time, things went there again. And it wasn't long after that, well, things happened again. And a long time went by, and the elder brother's sitting outside, and he's going, I wonder what is happening here. I wonder if something terrible has happened to my younger brother. And so he crept back into the cave and looked around the corner, and there he could see the little fire, and next to that was the blankets with old ugly woman laying next to his brother, only it wasn't old ugly woman, it was old ugly woman turned young pretty woman, and she was hot. And he called out, it says, if you need somebody else to join you. Because his lust was immediately inflamed. And she looked at him over the shoulder of the younger blind brother, and she said, you would not have me when I was old ugly woman. You will not have me now. So after a time, when the warmth of passion had settled a bit, the old ugly woman turned young pretty woman gathered some food, fed the boys once again, and then she began to do ceremony. She brought them sage and smoked them, purifying them. She bathed them. She purified in many different ways, in ways that we don't know, we can only imagine. And after 4 days of purification ceremony and rituals, she sat them down and she said, Here are my arrows and the bow to shoot them with. There are 4 arrows. Under no circumstances are you, sighted brother, to look upon Unktehi. And I encourage you to do this, that when she comes, count out 4 times 4 and then hide. And at that time, younger brother, you can fire those arrows and they will find their mark. And when she has died, this great water serpent, you're to cut out her heart. And in doing so, you must be prepared with great gauntlets of buffalo hide, because that heart is so icy cold, it will freeze, burn your hands right off. And after you've obtained the heart, that will speak to you and ask you things. And under no circumstances are you to do what she asks 4 times. And after the 4th time, you do what she tells you. For that will give you the power. And finally, under no circumstances are you to do anything other than share that power. And allow no one else to see that heart. And as she prepared to send the boys off on their journey back in search of Unktehi, the great water serpent, she looked at the blind boy and she whispered into his ear, "There will come a time when your blindness will be healed and you will see again. And when that time comes, please come back and find me." And the boys turned from that cave in the Black Hills and began their long journey back to the land of their people and where Unktehi resides. So the 2 brothers began walking away from that cave that was sitting in that little canyon with the carvings over the top. And as they did, the younger brother, the blind one, turned his blind eyes back as he was being led away. There was a great deal of resistance in him. We can understand. But go they did, and they traveled that same journey back a long ways. They went through the plains lands, the grass lands, and into the forest lands until they found the lands of the lakes. It seemed like they had traveled to the ends of the world by the time they found a place where there was a great slimy trail. And they followed that slimy trail until they came to a dark lake. And that dark lake had the slimy trail going into it. And the older brother said to the younger brother, "I think this is it." And so they sat themselves down at the edge of that lake. And the older brother said to the younger brother, "I will watch for the horn to touch the surface of the water. And when it does, I will jump behind this little hill here and hide my eyes and yell at you so that you can count 4 times 4. And when you counted 4 times 4, release your arrows, those arrows that will find their mark." And the younger brother said, "I will do as you ask, and I will prepare myself." So he took the arrows and a quiver by his side. He knocked one of them in his bow, and he stood by and he waited. And the elder brother stood next to that hill, that small hill, and they watched the lake. And they watched the lake for a long time until finally, as the sun was beginning to grow down close to setting, And the light was just right. They could see that the lake began to boil. And as it did, the boiling came greater and greater. And the elder brother looked on, his eyes keen, watching for the tip of that horn, until finally, just that moment, the tip of the horn, the bare tip of that horn of Unktehi, that great water monster, pierced the surface. And as it did, he called out, "She comes! She comes!" And he dove behind that little hillock and hid his face in the sand. And the younger brother began counting 1, 2, 3, 4. And he did this until he reached 16, 4 times 4. And as he drew his bow, he did not see this great monster rise up, teeth bared, begin to fall down upon him. But when he reached 16, he pulled each arrow out and released, pulled the third arrow out, released, and the fourth arrow released, and each was in flight before the first hit, and each struck that 7th spot behind which the Unktehi's heart lay. And she let out a horrendous scream and began thrashing back and forth until finally, splashing water and blood everywhere, she crashed to the ground right there on the beach. And she writhed this way and writhed that way. And the brothers were covered with water and blood until finally she stopped moving. And after a time, the older brother called down, "I think she's dead." And the younger brother said, "If it's so, old ugly woman turned into young pretty woman has said that if she's dead, she cannot harm us." And so they went down, and the older brother took out his sharp knife, and he stuck it into that place where the arrows were stuck. And he cut out that 7th spot and exposed the red crystal heart. And when he did, a blast of cold air came out, and it stood him back, and he went and got his gauntlets, buffalo hide with the fur on the inside so it wouldn't burn his hands, and he reached inside and pulled that crystal heart out. But it was so cold and so fierce to look at, he wrapped his cloak around it until finally it was such that he could hold it. And as he did that, a voice came out, somewhat muffled. And it said, "Whatever you do, do not cut off my horn." And he immediately followed the instructions of old ugly woman turned young pretty woman, took out his knife and went straight up on the snout and began sawing at that horn to cut it off. And when it had finally come free, he went back. And when the heart said to him, "I see you've cut my horn off. The least you could do is put the tip of the horn into the place where the arrows had struck me." But he did not do that, for had he done so, she would have come back to life and killed them. And when he didn't do that, she said, "Well, at least take some of my flesh and cook it. And feed yourselves, because I can see that you've traveled long." But they refused. For had they taken even one bite of her flesh, the poison would have been so great they would have been instantly killed. And when they did not eat of her flesh, she said, "I've been in this lake for many, many years. The least you can do is honor me by sprinkling a thin trail of tobacco around the lake." But they refused. For had they done so, all of her children from the nearby creeks and ponds would have arrived and devoured them in an instant. And then she said, "Take some of my blood, for I see one of you is blind, and put it in the eyes, and they will be healed." And the boys conferred between them, and they said, "This is the 5th request." An old ugly woman turned young pretty woman has said that if we do not do the first 4 things that she asks of us, we must do everything after that. So the elder brother took his spoon, his wooden spoon, and he dug into that wound where her heart had been removed, and he put the blood into the eyes of his brother. And in that instant, his eyes grew back, and he had sight again. So the 2 brothers took up that heart, and following her instructions, they took it back to where their people resided. And near the village, she told them, "Dig me a shaft, dig me a pit into the ground, and put me there and feed me. And when you do that, erect a lodge around me and paint an image of me around that lodge. And you must do the things that I ask of you." And so from that day forward, she demanded the blood of deer and other animals. And she demanded ceremonies on a daily basis. And every day she asked to be turned in a different direction. And the 2 brothers did that. And she said, "Should you fail to do these things that I ask of you, not only will you lose the power that I give you, but I shall turn into a blazing fire and devour you." And so it was. The 2 brothers were beholden to the cold red crystal heart.
So the brothers continued to make ceremonies. But in return, as they were told, they did gain great power. They could see the future. They became the greatest hunters their people had ever known, for they always knew where the game would be ahead of time, and their arrows never failed. And they always knew if there was some danger or trouble, and they knew the steps that they could take to avoid that. And so soon, the people began to rely on them, and the people made them chiefs. And they also became irresistible to the women of the people. The women threw themselves at them. They could have any woman they wanted at any time of the day or night. The elder brother married. In fact, he took 4 wives, and he had many children. And one day he said to his younger brother, "How is it that you haven't married? You could have any woman you want." And the younger brother said, "I desire only old ugly woman turned young pretty woman. It is her that I long for. And you know, when we journeyed to where she lives, I was blind. I don't know the way. And I'm wondering if you would lead me there." And the elder brother said that he would. And so they made the journey once again out of the woods and into the savannah, and over many creeks and streams and rivers, and out into the grasslands, and out into the flat places. And finally they arrived again back in the Black Hills, far off to the west. And they found that place. But when they came to that place where old ugly woman turned young pretty woman had lived, the cave in which she lived had sealed up. There was only a stone wall there, even though the strange figures of spirit animals and beings around what had been the entrance were still there. And they turned away and sadly went back home. And the story might end there, but it doesn't. For one day, The younger brother said to the older brother, he said, "Brother, I'm tired of having all this power. I don't want to see the future because I know that one day I will foresee my death or yours. And that is something I don't want to know. And I'm tired of always knowing where the game is and that my arrows always hit. There is no joy in hunting. It is merely slaughter. And I'm even tired of all the women coming to me, crawling under my blanket, desiring me. There is no joy in wooing anymore." And the older brother said, "I too am tired. I'm tired of always feeding the cold crystal heart of Unktehi, of always doing more and more complicated ceremonies and meeting all of its demands. But I think I know a way out. Old ugly woman turned young pretty woman told us that we should never let anyone see the heart." And so they agreed. And they called all the people together. And they said, "Say, you know that lodge that we told you never to look into, the one painted with the image of Unktehi? Aren't you curious as to what might be in there?" And indeed, the people were very curious. And they said, "Well, now we give you permission. Go in and see what's in there." And so the people went into the lodge. And they looked down into the hole. And when they looked at the red crystal heart of Unktehi, it began to scream, and it began to spin, and it began to burn, and it completely devoured itself in that moment. And some report that as it disappeared, a sound could be heard. It was the sound of an immense animal moving through water. That's how it was. And after that time, the twin brothers lived again as normal men, taking the good with the bad as it comes. You know, for some years, the people would occasionally remember this story. They would tell one another what had happened, the story of Unktehi and the twin brothers. But one year, a black-capped chickadee was sitting up on a lodge pole, and it overheard the story. And it liked the story. It took it with it. And that's why the story has a certain persistence, like the black-capped chickadee, who stays in the coldest parts of the North Woods all winter long, when it's far below zero. That little ball of black and white feather survives all that time. It was carried for many generations of chickadees, many hundreds of years. But one year, a weasel raided a chickadee nest and it ate the eggs, and the story went into the weasel people. And they began to carry the story, and that's why the story has a kind of sly, weaselly wisdom about it. And it might have remained with the weasel people. But one year, a hawk caught a weasel. And the story went into the hawk people, and that's why the story can see so far. And it so happened that I was walking down a trail one day, and I picked up the feather of a hawk that had been dropped there. And the story went into me, and I told Ben, and now we've told you.